Welcome back for another PTO Leader Chat. I am Christina Heideck of PTO Answers, and with me once again is Karen Joyce. Hey, Karen.
Oh, hello. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I am really excited to talk about something with you today because this is something I get a lot of questions from viewers and people who read the blog and all that stuff. They want to kind of know, like, who's actually in control of the PTO? Is it the parents? Is it the principal? Is it the teachers? Is it like who's making decisions? Does it just come down to the board? Are we going to leave it to the general membership?
Heaven forbid.
I know. And for surezies, there's like right answers for all of this, but I think it can kind of be tricky. I know you've mentioned that your school is undergoing a bit of this in one aspect, and I haven't been personally experiencing this, but like a lot of people have been reaching out. A lot of viewers have been reaching out. So why don't I start first, because I don't want to lean too heavily to get into your personal situation or current situation. But I guess the situation that has arisen pretty recently for me is someone actually gave me a call to talk through an issue where I think they just weren't acting like adults. I think at the end of the day, that was part of the issue. And that people got their feelings hurt. And so the specific issue was that they were doing a bylaws update and they didn't have quorum. So they had quorum at the beginning of the meeting, but then when it came time to vote, two people had left the meeting, meaning they no longer had quorum, but they still went ahead and voted and were acting like they did have quorum. And then somebody else kind of had a problem with that. And they were like changing qualifications of people who could run for office. And so I just said, oh, okay, you can't, like, it has to be the general membership, like approving the bylaws changes, and you have to have quorum. And she goes, well, can't my board just agree? Like, we're all just trying to do this. And I go, no, especially when you're like trying to change something for like a qualifier for who can run. Like, that's not going to work, or who can be elected. And so that was the initial thing. But then it gave me like a greater idea. Like, people really don't have clarity about who gets to make the final decision. Like, who is actually controlling it. So from the perspective that I just shared with that situation, what do you think, Karen?
I think, when you deal with things like changing the bylaws, I think you have to go by the letter of the law, because that is your insurance to like move forward and cut down on the drama, right? I mean, because at the end of the day, that's there to help protect you and your association, your affiliations, whatever, to conduct business in a professional manner. So yeah, I think leaning on your bylaws, your standing rules, to make sure that you're doing things by the letter of the law, especially when you're doing things like a bylaw change. Buying popsicles versus ice cream, that's, there's different levels of decisions that we have to work through, and knowing and recognizing the big ones are the bylaws, and making sure that everybody in the membership feels like they have a seat at the table and that their voices and opinions are heard through the correct channels. And if it's a board decision, then that's laid out, right? This has come up for us about replacing board members, right? So we have a whole thing in our bylaws about we have a nominating committee, and this is when it's dealt with and then they're voted on. But what about somebody that drops out midterm? Well, that's stated in our bylaws that is a decision for the board, because to get quorum popping up, because unfortunately people do move and things like that, that would be really cumbersome for the entire membership to deal with. But that's in the bylaws. So that if anybody said, well, how come now Susie Q is on she's your secretary? Well, the bylaws stated this, and this is how we dealt with that absence or whatever. So yeah, I think following the letters of those laws is crucial in that.
Yeah. I think that in this particular situation, they were trying to do the right thing. So what I counseled her to do was just present it at the next board meeting, because it's a 2-meeting process to amend your bylaws anyway. So just treat like the first one as the presentation, where everyone's on notice that this is going to change, and then you can vote on it but they were trying to exclude somebody from running. And that sounds like bad, but it may have been a good thing for the group, but in a bad way. Does that make any sense? Like, I think the person who wanted to run didn't have good intentions, but I think that's when they lose in the vote.
Right. And because you set up precedents.
Yeah.
There's dominoes that happen. If you don't think about it globally and you think about it at the personal level, that can have bad repercussions later on.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Because it's like, then they'll just do the same to them. They're like, well, then because I think the other person was trying to vote for the one officer. I have to sneeze. Hang on 1 second. Oh, all right. It just went away. And she was afraid that she was going to lose the election. And I was like, well, you just have to get more people there. Like, and it was further complicated by it's a PTO without specific membership requirements. So anybody is a member. And I'm like, right. Okay, that sounds good, except for in practice, then this is what this means, that you don't know the world. And sometimes you do have to call people and be like, we don't want this one leader. Like we have this situation in the PTO that I'm currently in. I was not there yet, but I heard about this where there was one very ineffective leader, and that is putting it nicely. She was divisive. She was rude. She was disrespectful. And it was like her way or the highway. She just wasn't a good team player. At the end of the day, she wasn't a good team player. She did not learn in kindergarten how to play nicely with others. Like failed on all accounts.
Oh, good.
And she had it in her mind that she was going to run the PTO, and other people were like, nope. So they just made sure everybody who was a member, they said, you're going to be there, right? You're going to be there, and counted numbers and just got enough people to vote someone who would not have been so divisive. Now, I should say this person had already had a track record of ruining a different unit where people quit mid-year and just said, stick a fork in me. I am done. This is crazy, because of the drama that she created. And just, I don't know, she just wasn't, like I said, did not play well with others. So like sometimes you have to do that, but that's like legitimate getting out the vote.
Yeah.
Instead of like rigging the rules. So, yeah. But a lot of times it's like, if you have a really domineering principal who doesn't quite understand, like, I think it's easier if your group is an independent organization. Like if you are using the school's tax exempt information, if they are storing your group money in the school's safe, or in, like, if you don't have a separate bank account, then you really kind of have to toe the line for whatever they want. There's no independence.
Yeah, that's a really hard situation, because then you really serve at the pleasure of the school, which I always think, to be honest, we have to do, right? Because we still use the building. Yes, we could have our own separate entity off school property, but if we can't send out flyers with students, if we can't interact within the school, then we're not meeting our mission at all. So I think we always have to kind of deal with that political situation of having all those voices heard: teachers, principals, administration, and parents.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just going to say it is at their pleasure, and also sometimes it is a pleasure though. And sometimes it's not an issue, and you don't even realize that that's what has to happen until you run into someone who's difficult, who is more controlling. Like I've had the whole spectrum of really easy to work with principals who are not yes men. Well, that makes it sound like they're weak, but like people who are like, I love that. Yes. And let's, build upon this. Let me clear out any roadblocks. Like I've had this one principal, oh my gosh, he is like such a superstar. And now he is moved up. He's no longer a building principal. He's in the administration further higher up. And we were having a bonfire and it wouldn't light. And so we had a permit from the fire department. So it was PTO led, right? And the PTO paid for the fire permit, or the permit. So the fire department was there with trucks in case the baseball field lit on fire, which I don't know how dirt burns, but okay. So they were there, and the bonfire would not light. And so the principal used lighter fluid, which is a big no-no. the firemen do not like that. And he said, listen, I'm going to look like a real a-hole if this bonfire doesn't happen.
And stepped up and took for the team.
He did. And so he kind of got yelled at by the fire department, but he's like, at the end of the day, this has got to happen. But it was so funny because when he was telling me what happened, like later that evening, he didn't say a-hole. He used the uncensored version. And I went, all right now, like you are awesome to work with. It's like, okay, we have a certain comfort level if you get there with the principals that it can be more pleasurable to work with or more enjoyable versus principals who just are saying no all the time. Ugh. So.
Yeah, I think locally, and I'm not just speaking from my unit, I've heard this from other groups, is that the budget becomes an issue. Who has control over the budget? And principals always need more, right? And we all want the same thing. We want to give all the things to the kids. I wish there was magic money that we could give all the things to all the teachers all the time, and that's just not reality. And so who gets to control those purse strings? And I think it's a dance. Because you don't know the needs. You don't know all of the things coming down from the district. You don't know, morale issues sometimes of what some teachers might need and some might not. And it's hard to have that information and like get everybody on the same page when they see it as a us versus them kind of a thing. And so you've really got to broker some of those conversations and realize that everybody has good intentions behind it. And so how do you make sure that everybody feels like their needs are met and that their wants are addressed? We can't maybe meet all the wants, but I think that comes up a lot for us of trying to figure that budgeting out. The money part gets really sticky.
Yeah, it does. But I think that's where having a budget saves the day, because you can show then how much of your budget is being spent on teacher support or classroom support, I guess. Or staff appreciation or family events or, you name it, you could figure it out. And actually, I'll just drop this right now. I don't know if by the time this video comes out, I don't know if the new Treasurer's Finance Manager will be out, but a new part is being added where there's going to be visual representation of your budget, like like a pie chart, so people will see it. I'm very excited about it. It is not yet built, but I mentioned it to my developer, who's my husband, and he goes, "Oh, I like that," because actually this was not my idea. This was feedback I got from someone who was trying out the new version, and they were like, what would be even more awesome if we had this, because I'm very visual and I like to see charts. And he was like, oh, I know how to do that. I'm going to have to do that later. So that is to come. But I think that really can help too when you figure out where you're spending your money. And so some groups are operating, Karen, without a budget. It's like a free for all. And I don't understand that at all.
How does that happen?
I don't know.
That would stress me out.
I don't know.
Because I want to be able to pay for the promotion cakes at the end of the year. And if we go all into carnival in the fall, how do you know that you're going to, budget is important.
I just think there's no accountability there. There's no, there's not as much transparency, because I think that is such a driver, so much conflict is when people think there's backroom deals being made, or that people, they're ganging up on somebody and that they just don't like her. And so they're not giving into her ideas or not supporting her ideas. And there's just like, blah, 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 blah. But I think the budget, having it clear, having it written out, and then seeing this is where our income is coming from, this is how we're allocating it, it's just the best thing to do. I don't know how groups operate otherwise. I really don't.
I don't know. One of our situations right now is that we have a joint fundraiser, and it came about because one group at the school was fundraising and we kind of got pushed to the side because we serve at the pleasure of the school. And so we were like, how do we make any money as a PTA if we're getting trumped in timing in the fall of when things come out? And so we kind of brokered a deal where we did it together. And now I think it's just more of the semantics of it and the optics of how it looks like we're focused on one section of the school when we're really not, because 100% of our budget goes back to the school. But on paper, it looks like we're hyper fixated on one section of the school because of how that fundraiser developed. So we're working on those issues as well and trying to make sure that everybody's needs are met. It's hard.
Yeah, I think one suggestion I have for you is to use the treasurer's finance manager, and in the budget section, there's a notes section that you can add in there. So add in additional information so that people would understand. So for that expense, because that's where you're going to be actually the income line and the expense line, you would just add in joint fundraiser with XYZ school committee. And that way anybody looking at it on the face would have that information. Wouldn't it be like, they'd know it's not an allocation choice and then it was a partnership and cooperation choice. It's survival choice actually is what it sounds like. But that would be one way to do that, so that it would just be plain on its face. Because that when you print out, then what I always like for like treasurer reports at meetings, I like to have the transactions as well as the year-to-date budget, seeing what we've budgeted for, what we've spent, what the difference is, because then you can kind of go through and think about what's coming up and what adjustments that might need to be made, either pulling back in one area or spending a lot more. And that way at the end of the year, you're not rolling over gobs and gobs and gobs of money that could have been allocated to efforts for the current class of kids.
Yeah. And I think we're kind of getting in the weeds of this, but I think the way our budget's passed is maybe a little bit problematic because we pass big buckets. And so the general membership says, yes, you can spend $10,000 to support students. And then we have a back end budget that the board basically works off of and says, out of that 10,000, we expect to spend this much on Halloween, this much on Thanksgiving, this much on a program. And so once we have these big buckets, there's a lot of wiggle room. And so it's a lot of like, you don't want those backroom deals, and we don't work that way, but it's hard to make sure people stay on that because they see, okay, well, you've got $20,000. We can do all kinds of fun things. You go, but if we do this, we can't do this. And that's what we really budgeted for as a board. But it saved us during the pandemic when we couldn't do a big carnival, but we said we want family engagement. Well, let's send something home and use that money elsewhere without having to get quorum and repassing budget changes. So yeah, we're new and we're growing.
Yeah. Was that the system that you were suggested to have? Yeah, I would change that. I would change that because I think it just gets like you've already highlighted some of the problems, but like we have buckets for like family events. So I guess it's the same thing, but they're smaller buckets. Cause like, I think we were only given or only had like maybe $5,000 for family events. And there were certain things that people would do like every year. So it wasn't like recreating out of whole cloth. Right. So we didn't have that. So we just passed one thing. I'll have to show you our system and see if it might work a little bit better for you. You could maybe introduce it and say, hey, because then there's less, I don't know.
Push and pull. This who gets to have control, right? Because
it is, but that's not very transparent. I just think that's going to run into problems for you down the line. Like if you get not a bad actor, but somebody with who wants a spotlight, like a mic grabber or a spotlight grabber, I think that I'm thinking of different personalities that have run through my group in the past. And I'd be like, oh, they would have abused that like 100%, 150%. So that's interesting. Interesting. I love to see how other groups are set up and you go, oh, that's really good. Or, ooh, no.
Ooh, maybe not. Maybe not.
not that. Let's just tweak it just a bit. But yeah, I think it's I
think would behoove us. I think that's where we kind of need to develop into, because then it's very transparent, it's very clear, and then the intent and throughout the year, it's less of this barter brokering kind of situation every time something comes up.
Yeah. No. I'm also wondering if you could cure that with standing rules.
Which we don't have.
You don't have. You have to have standing rules because bylaws, I'm big on these things. I am big on the like nerding out on this. So you have to have like bylaws are the big stuff, right? The big picture items, and standing rules are the details of how you're going to put how you're going to make the big stuff happen.
Yeah. And I think now that we're our group is now, we've had it 4 years. Take pandemic out of that. Like, I think now we see more of that day to day of like expectations of board members checking emails has become sort of a situation. I want that kind of worked into standing rules since we have our whole Google workspace. If you've got an email out there that's got your board position on it, I don't want things stacking up that nobody's heard about. And then it's like, why is nobody getting back to me? And that kind of thing. So that's a summer goal and a fall goal and a year-round goal to really work on, so that, yeah, everybody knows who has say in all these different things, how the big stuff gets done. So.
Yeah. Interesting. We'll have to talk about that another time, Karen.
I know. Lots of work to do.
Yeah. Well, there always is, right? Because these are volunteer organizations. And so it's only as good as the previous leaders. Like, you're starting with whatever you get, and we all get different things. And there's a whole bunch of different situations and so many different factors. Like, if you are independent from the school, if you are a 501c3, like I didn't think it would be such an issue until this year. Like, when I told the district treasurer to kind of go like take a walk with his suggestion that we couldn't use our group's email, like our chosen email that we'd been using for the past 7 years, because he thought there would be, did I not tell you about this? He thought there would. Yeah. So our PTA, like years before I got involved, there was another very organized leader who came through and said, okay, instead of like every leader having like just passing to their personal email, we'll set up like branded PTA accounts, and they're all through Gmail. Okay. So they're all through Gmail. Let's start with that. So it's the name of our school, the first name or a part of the name, then president. So the school is just Brush, I'll just say. So it's Brush president, Brush treasurer, Brush concessions, right? So it's uniform, and they're all at Gmail. So the district treasurer got a bug up his butt one day and emailed our treasurer and said, you can't use Brush treasurer because people might get confused and they might send you something confidential thinking that they're sending it to me. And the district treasurer, they do not use Gmail. Okay. And they do use a personal name. It's not district treasurer at district, do you know what I mean? .edu, blah, 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 blah. So that's number one. So I totally, before responding, because I was like, what the heck? Before responding, I reached out to the past treasurers and said, have you ever gotten something that was misdirected? Because I wanted to see if this was actually an issue. Because sometimes people propose solutions to problems that do not exist.
All the time. It's crazy. All the time that happens. You're so right.
And so I thought, okay, let's start here. Is this actually a problem? Because if it's a problem, then we should address it. But I did not want to address it if it wasn't, because our Google Drive and all of our like cloud storage system is tied to that. And his solution was that we could no longer use it. And I was real nice about it, but ultimately we got to the fact that we are an independent 501c3. And while we work in coordination with, we do not work at the direction of the school district. And I CC'd the superintendent on that one. So I just kind of had to tell him to go pound sand on that. And he never responded. I was respectful. I said respectfully, but I still was just like, no. And so I saw the superintendent later and she's like, yeah, I don't know what was up with him about that. Cause like, she didn't have a problem with it. Cause I was like, it's never happened. And it would be a ton of work. And it's just like, and it's never happened. And so, and I even came up with a proposed solution for like how we would handle it. And he said, well, no, that won't be good either. And I just said, okay, here's how we're going to handle it. If something should come in, we will tell them we are not the right person. They should contact you, period. End of story. Like, we're not going to do this.
Right. Because at some point, we're adults. We are basically running a nonprofit. You're licensed and bonded and insured and all that stuff. Like, there has to be some trust if you're going to have these parent associations that, yeah, you got to have some autonomy there too. Wow, that's fun. That's interesting.
I forgot a detail, because then when I replied back, because my treasurer sent it to me and said, I don't want to deal with this, will you? So I said, absolutely, because it really went to the issue of the autonomy of all of the groups in our district, because if they could tell us what to do, then they could tell all the other groups. And I was just like, no, 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 no. And so then when I replied back and he goes, well, actually, you shouldn't use yours either, that had school president at Gmail. And I went, because he goes, the school board president someone might confuse you. And I was like, that makes no sense, because the district name is not the same as the school name.
Right.
It made no sense, Karen. So anyway, I told him bye-byes. Wow. So anyway, sometimes it can be that issue, but a lot of groups, I think it just comes down to like remembering how to run a healthy group. Like it should never be the president just dictating what happens. It should never be the president and treasurer figuring everything out. It should never be the board just figuring things out. It should be those positions doing the initial work and then bringing it to the larger group. And then the membership, like general membership, it being presented to the membership to decide on, is my view of a healthy group.
Yeah, I think that is the pinnacle, like what you really want. I think our membership hasn't been so active. And so I think a lot of things have come back to the board, and that's really how we've operated. But I don't know that it's not the healthiest way to do it, because it doesn't give people that ownership, right? And if everything is just the board doing everything behind the scenes, then people don't feel as engaged and empowered to help out. So,
well, yeah. I will add that we have had a less engaged membership too. And so, but here's how I've handled that. We do all of the business at a general membership meeting. So if it ends up, it's only board members, then it is what it is. Like the other people have had that opportunity. So we're like some groups, I think they do everything by text or group me. And it's like, no. You have to like go to your regular meeting spot, put it out there. People know you're meeting there. And then if it just happens to be that it's only board members, but other people totally have the opportunity to come and participate, that's a whole nother ball of wax. So I guess that's the distinction I'm drawing, just so people are totally clear. Not that I think you guys are only doing that, but all right. Yeah. So, all right. I think this was a good conversation about those like tensions that come up and how do you deal with that? Because they're so sticky. And they don't feel good. Like that interaction with our treasurer I was not feeling good for a while, because that was troubling. Because you never like to tell someone to go away like that. So.
No. And especially with people that you have to have an ongoing relationship with, right? You have to keep working with the principals at your school. You have to keep working with your board members. And so, just relying on those bylaws and standing rules. It's really helpful to make sure that all of those things are transparent and making a healthy group.
Yeah. Well, awesome, Karen. So I hope everyone watching has enjoyed this conversation as much as I've had having the conversation with you, Karen. And then I hope everyone will join us for the next video. Want even more guidance on how to be a stronger leader so you can run a better PTO or PTA? All these resources and more are waiting for you at ptoanswers.com.